This hearing of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, Federal Workforce come to order, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I'd like to recognize myself for an opening statement right now. I want to welcome each of you and the witnesses who are here today to take part in what I believe will be a very important hearing on a bipartisan basis. My partner here, the ranking member, Mr. Mfume, and I are deeply committed to understanding how we're going to get more money to the reason why it was given by the taxpayer. More money and efficiency from a congressional perspective when we provide agencies with money, and in this case, the Department of Defense with the money that it is given for lethality and for the war fighter effort. I want to thank our witnesses for taking time with me to discuss and make sure that they knew that today would be very important to us and them, as we really want to hear from them about their ideas. They're people that are on the front lines that are day to day engaged in the same business that we intend to engage them on. Financial transparency of the military is perhaps the most critical dollar that is spent. To remain confident in DoD's ability to protect American interests at home and abroad, we need to be able to properly monitor their financial performance. I think more than that, the Congress has been engaged for a number of years in trying to make sure that DoD was not only efficient, but effective. And the efficiency is where this falls today. In fiscal year 2023, DoD received just over $850 billion, half the federal discretionary funding. Also during that same year, they reported $3.8 trillion in assets, a whopping 70% of the federal government's assets. Last year, we held a hearing asking basic questions such as how tax dollars are spent, how existing assets are managed, and which business systems track the flow of funds through the department. And today, we still have not completed that exercise. Some could say we don't have those answers. DoD failed its sixth consecutive audit and holds the distinction of being the only federal agency that has never passed a comprehensive audit. I get that, and we're not jumping up and down upset about it. What we are is here to make sure that we're on a road to recovery, that we're on a road to understand that the basic elements that must be understood in the effectiveness by not only DoD but by Congress to look at what needs to be accomplished. It requires us to do it together. A financial statement audit isn't just simply an exercise. It is an important exercise. It is a purpose of Congress and our oversight capacity and responsibility. We need to know where we stand, and we need to hear from the people who are on the front line. As required by fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, DoD must achieve a clean audit opinion by December the 28th, 2028. It's right around the corner. To meet this goal, DoD has established audit priorities and developed corrective action plans. However, GAO noted that DoD's remediation plans were not sufficient and detailed enough to achieve this clean audit. In other words, not sure that we're on that path after all. So, instead of focusing on high-level financial management priorities instead of the steps needed to achieve a clean audit, we necessarily are here today to make sure that that is the pathway. GAO also found that DoD had consistently missed remediation deadlines established in the department's own financial roadmap. Clearly, more work is needed. We are not here to point fingers. We're not here to fail. We're here to effectively work together, just as Mr. Mfume and I see this as an issue. I am convinced DoD does too. I'm convinced that there are people within DoD who see how important this is. I'm convinced that DoD, and we will hear today, has certain parts of the military that have very adequately accepted that rigor that would be required for financial integrity. But it's bigger than that, and we're going to hear today from this panel to describe to us about how we can continue to work together, where those distinctions may be, and how we can work to make sure that they are encouraged to make this work. Today's hearing, I think, is important also from understanding the scorecard. The scorecard that I think has been passed out to everybody today could be seen as negative, or it could be seen as a work in progress. I believe it's a work in progress. So we've got questions that we're going to ask about the major problems. What's preventing progress? Is DOD trying to remedy its financial management shortcomings? How is DOD learning from each attempted audit? We see the Marine Corps has. Can we extend that to other piece parts of DOD? And what can Congress do, and how can we work together? So today we have three distinguished people who will be with us, who I'm going to highlight in just a minute. But first I want to move to my distinguished ranking member, the ranking member, Mr. Mfume, for any opening statement the gentleman chooses to make. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sessions. I'm going to also thank the witnesses for being here today. This is going to be an interesting hearing, and I hope it is, in fact, the beginning of a process that gets us to greater financial efficiency. Last July, we gathered this committee room and held a hearing to address financial accountability in the Department of Defense. And just like magic, we're back here again today to continue that conversation and to continue it in light of the Department of Defense's recent inability to pass a clean audit for fiscal year 2023. Unfortunately and sadly, this is not a new phenomenon, as we all know, at the Department of Defense. In fiscal year 2018, DOD began its efforts to successfully complete a department-wide audit. The FY18 audit, covering $2.7 trillion in assets and $2.6 trillion in liabilities, was likely and probably the largest audit any of us have ever conceptualized. As expected for such a large organization, the first audit attempt revealed severe material weaknesses, where DOD could not provide an accurate accounting of their finances. There have been as we know, five additional audit attempts after the 2018 audit, and yet most of the Department of Defense still has not produced a clean audit. So to be clear, like most of us in this room, I support our troops. I know, like many of you, that Congress has a duty to ensure our nation is protected from a growing number of threats, both at home and abroad. I also know we have a duty, however, to maintain accountability for the billions of dollars that make up defense spending, dollars that total about half of the federal government's total discretionary spending and nearly $3.8 trillion in total assets. In fiscal year 2024 alone, U.S. taxpayers turned over $851 billion to the Department of Defense. That figure represents one of the largest investments in the DOD budget in our nation's history. And while we continue to provide the Department of Defense with escalating sums of money, only 11 of the 29 components achieved clean audits. The 18 components that failed, including the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, comprise about 90% of DOD's assets by dollar amount. I want to go back to what the chairman said about the Marine Corps. Maybe there's something to be learned there by the other departments, but clearly they seem to be on the right path. So standing in the way of a clean audit for these components is the wide prevalence of material weaknesses. In other words, areas in which the Department of Defense lacks internal controls over financial reporting. We've heard a lot about that in the previous hearing. We're hearing it again now, and I'm sure as you all testify, that will continue to be a term that makes its way into this conversation. So I'm gratified and quite appreciative of the sacrifice that so many hardworking Americans make to keep our nation safe. This committee believes, however, we must ensure that our service members have the most sophisticated, modernized technology systems to eliminate the threats that exist, but also that the department has the most modern and efficient way of doing its accounting. I look forward to discussing how this committee and indeed the entire Congress can work with the Department of Defense in modernizing its financial management systems and how we can actually incentivize DoD to improve the acquisition and management practices that it employs every day. The security of the nation remains of paramount concern, and accountability measures across the Department of Defense must be efficient, they must be effective, and they must be informative. So I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to hearing the testimonies of the witnesses before us. I would be remiss if I did not say that patience is running thin, and I don't know how to say it any other way, but we expect more, and that's why we are pushing for more in a bipartisan way to bring about the change that we know is so desperately needed. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back any time.
Thank you very much. I concur with the distinguished gentleman, and so that the panel knows this and our friends that are with us today, Mr. Mfume and I deeply believe in the United States military, their mission, and the men and women and the families. But we also believe we have an obligation to continue working with DoD on this. I'm pleased today to welcome our witnesses. Tom Steffens is the Senior Advisor to the Comptroller, previously served as Deputy Chief Financial Officer advising the Comptroller and Defense senior leaders on all financial matters and management and the reforms. And our conversation yesterday was very enlightening. And Tom, I'm delighted that you decided to show today. I know you said you would, but thank you. I think you have a lot to add today. Brent Mansfield is Deputy Inspector General for Audit. Prior to this role, he served as Senior Advisor to the Inspector General, advising on matters affecting the mission and operations of the Department of Defense, Office of Inspector General. Brett, welcome. We're delighted that you're here also. And Mr. Ashraf Khan is Director of the Financial Management and Assurance Team at the GAO, the Government Accounting Office. Since 2009, he's focused his work on financial management and audit readiness for the Department of Defense. I must say, if I can, to my dear friend, I think today will be an enlightening hearing for each of us, and I know our witnesses are up to that task. I would now ask if each of our witnesses would rise and raise their right hand. And pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I ask that they please take their seat. We are delighted that you're here. I did not get a chance yesterday to personally describe this to each of you, but you're here for a reason. And we really might want you to complete your answer, give your testimony. People on this side are very interested in hearing from you, and we've got a lot of questions. But we're going to try and stick to a time format. Doesn't have to be 5 minutes. It can be a little bit over. But please make sure your point is well made, and I would say the members, I will give them that latitude also. So I'm delighted that you're Mr. Steffens. We're going to have you go ahead and first start your testimony. Gentlemen is recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Mfume, members, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'm Tom Steffens, Senior Advisor and former Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the Under Secretary of Defense Comptroller. First, I'd like to thank Secretary Austin and Deputy Secretary Hicks for their unwavering commitment and tone at the top, leading our financial management improvement efforts. This has been a key to our acceleration of audit progress, as evidenced in our financial modernization efforts and most recent audit results. Today, I'll cover the status of audit within the department, our need for continued open dialogue with those entrusted with our oversight, and I'll share my thoughts on PBBE reform. In FY23, the Marine Corps was the first military service to receive an unmodified audit opinion. This was achieved by using systemic, cultural, analytical approach imposed by an engagement from senior leaders like the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Eric Smith. Audit success was a priority across all fields like acquisition, human resources, and logistics within the Marine Corps. The department is replicating this success, implementing lessons learned from the Marines. At the start of our FY 2024 audit, unmodified and qualified audit opinions together covered 51%, or $1.9 trillion, of the department's total assets, a number that will increase in the coming years. The FY24 National Defense Authorization Act mandated an unmodified audit opinion on the DoD-wide financial statements by December 31st, 2028. This is also now the department's audit goal. It demands a fresh look at our timelines, risks, dependencies, and measures of progress, and is evidenced in our revised audit roadmaps. We look at 5 areas when measuring audit outcomes and benefits: workforce modernization, business operations, quality decision-making, reliable networks, and finally, enhanced public confidence. In FY23, the department invested $991 million for audit remediation. This investment focuses heavily on tackling the root cause of systemic, long-standing issues that impede success. The Secretary's audit priorities, revised annually, are an essential part of our audit strategy. For each audit priority, we establish quantitative goals and report on progress to the Deputy Secretary of Defense quarterly. In FY23, the Air Force General Fund closed its fund balance with Treasury material weakness as an audit priority. Army Working Capital Fund and Navy General Fund and Marine Corps all improved on fund balance with Treasury material weaknesses as well. Combined, these results encompass $423 billion, or 55% of our FY23 ending balance of $768 billion in fund balance with Treasury, validating that addressing this key material weakness as an audit priority has been effective. The Comptroller General, Mr. Dodaro, has advised us to simplify our financial system environment. We continue to assess, upgrade, consolidate, and retire systems that are impacting our ability to financially report successfully. Congress's support is critical to our success, as demonstrated in the FY24 NDA inclusion of beginning balance certification for the Defense Logistics Agency's National Stockpile Transactions Fund, and we appreciate the support and the partnership there. We will continue to seek congressional support when addressing our most difficult systemic issues and providing adequate and consistent funding and staffing for our financial modernization efforts. Adequate and consistent funding is paramount to financial management modernization, not to mention our military's overall readiness. Over the course of the last 15 fiscal years, there have been 48 continuing resolutions lasting for 1,794 days, or nearly 5 calendar years. In a letter to the House Committee on Appropriations, Secretary Austin detailed to Chairman Cole the negative impact of a 6-month continuing resolution. As noted in the letter, our budget is aligned to the National Defense Strategy. Without a timely budget, we are challenged in investing in new technologies, equipment, and training. This has a profound impact on an effect on the quality of life of our service members, damages military hiring, and delays vital investments in capacity such as submarine and shipbuilding. Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller Michael McCord and I joined Secretary Austin in urging Congress urging Congress to act urgently. Congress and the Department have consistently collaborated on critical financial management improvements, including reforming the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process. The PBBE process is a fundamental strategic decision support mechanism for our leadership. The report from the Commission on PBB Reform, released in March, included 28 recommendations parceled into 35 initiatives. The Deputy Secretary of Defense endorsed 26 PBB reform initiatives for implementation across the department. The timeline for PBBE reform relies on outcomes from complex, multi-organizational discussions and legislative actions, and success depends upon sustained cooperation and transparency. We appreciate congressional support for the National Defense Strategy and the Department's financial management improvement efforts. We are thankful for our interagency partners' assistance in broadening information sharing. We value the independent assessments coming from Government Accountability Office and the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General, and we will continue to listen to their recommendations to achieve future success. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, on the back side. Mr. Mansfield, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Mfume, and members of the Subcommittee on Government Operations Federal Workforce. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the Office of Inspector General's role in auditing the DoD's financial statements and oversighting the DoD's efforts to obtain a clean audit opinion. I am Brett Mansfield, the Deputy Inspector General for Audit at the DoD Office of Inspector General, and it is my privilege to be here today to represent the dedicated oversight professionals that make up the DoD Office of Inspector General. The financial statement audits performed or overseen by the DoD Office of Inspector General are critically important for maintaining the public's trust, ensuring accountability, and improving DoD operations. The 2024 financial statement audits are ongoing now, so I cannot speak to their results today. However, in fiscal year 23, as you mentioned, Chairman, the DoD reported discretionary appropriations of just over $850 billion, which comprised half the discretionary spending of the United States. The DoD also reported nearly $3.8 trillion in assets, which is approximately 70% of the government's total assets. Because of its size and financial reporting deficiencies, the DoD is limiting the federal government's ability to obtain a clean audit opinion on its financial statements. Fiscal year 23 marked the 6th full-scale audit of the DoD's financial statements, and for the 6th year, it resulted in a disclaimer of opinion on the DoD's agency-wide financial statements. In addition, of the 29 reporting entities that underwent standalone audits, 10 received clean opinions, 1 received a qualified opinion, and 18 received disclaimers of opinion. The disclaimers of opinion were issued because the DoD entities continue to have unresolved accounting issues and material weaknesses. Fiscal year 23 also included a major development with the Marine Corps reaching an unmodified opinion. However, this only came after substantial effort in completing an unconventional 2-year audit. Sustaining this opinion will require significant effort going forward. As my prepared statement today, I provided a recently released Office of Inspector General report, understanding the results of the fiscal year 23 financial statement audits. There are 3 key themes discussed in this report, which I will highlight today. First, the comptroller and financial management community cannot do it alone. Leadership involvement from the commanders and operators is imperative. The comptroller does not have command and control of operators, yet the information and systems relied upon for financial reporting are often controlled by soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians. Every time a bomb is released from a plane, a submarine undergoes maintenance, or a radar system is fielded. Service members are inputting information into DoD management systems, which ultimately results in a financial transaction and have a direct impact on the reliability of the DoD's financial statements. Second, the inability to support its financial statements is inherently an operational risk for the DoD. Financial statements reflect in part the assets such as munitions, equipment, and spare parts the DoD has on hand. This information comes from logistics and inventory systems that the operators rely on to have the right equipment to train, fight, and win. If the DoD cannot support the information required for financial statement auditing, such as cost, location, and condition of these items, it stands to bear that the operators cannot rely on those same systems to make informed decisions regarding the availability, location, and condition of supplies and equipment. Third, material weaknesses are long-standing and persistent. While the DoD makes progress each year in addressing material weaknesses, we still consider 17 of them, of the 28 material weaknesses, to be scope limiting, meaning the DoD OIG cannot perform the necessary procedures to draw a conclusion on the financial statements. These weaknesses cover topics including information technology, inventory, and government property in the possession of contractors. Limiting material weaknesses stop audit work. In other words, we cannot do our job until the DoD fully addresses these weaknesses. Achieving a clean financial statement opinion is a long-term effort for the DoD. The Office of Inspector General believes that leaders outside of the Comptroller's Office must continue to focus on material weaknesses. Addressing these weaknesses requires sustained leadership, focus, and significant coordination within and between each entity within the DoD. As for my office, the Department of Inspector General, or the Office of Inspector General, we will continue to fully and fairly audit the DoD's financial statements to identify deficiencies and areas for improvement, and to provide actionable information and recommendations to the DoD. Our commitment to enhancing the financial health of the DoD through independent oversight remains steadfast in this crucial long-term endeavor. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. Mr. Khan, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Mfume, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the benefits of financial statement audits for the Department of Defense. The DoD is an immense and complex organization responsible for half the federal government's discretionary spending, overseeing millions of service members and civilian employees across the globe. This scale, ensuring sound financial management and transparency, is not just a necessity, it is crucial for our national security and operational effectiveness. But just as the size and scope of the department is something hard to grasp, so are the benefits of financial statement audits. An analogy might help provide some insight. Imagine a professional football team. Each game is high stakes, with a lot riding on each play. The team wants to do as well as possible in every aspect, from training camp all the way through. Each hopes to a Super Bowl victory. Amongst the tools available to today's professional teams is advanced video analysis to meticulously review game footage. This is more than just simply watching highlights. It's about examining every play, every movement, every strategy. Coaches and players analyze this footage to analyze strategies and weaknesses, correct mistakes, optimize performance, and make sure each player follows the best practices. Errors get corrected, plays get improved, controls on who does what and how and when get tightened. This detailed analysis provides important information to help coaches make best strategic decisions and players make best choices in both preparation and the moment. It produces a more successful and cohesive team and more effective and efficient play and management. It's crucial to the team's success. Now let's draw a parallel to the financial statement audit. Just as a team reviews game footage to improve, auditors review DoD's financial statements and processes. Identifying weaknesses and improving strategies. Video analysis helps coaches to spot inefficiencies in plays and areas where players may need additional training, ensuring the team makes informed decisions to improve performance. Similarly, financial statement audits identify material weaknesses in internal controls and processes. By remediating these weaknesses, DoD can improve its accuracy and reliability of its financial information, leading to better decision-making and resource management. Tighter coordination and execution. By reviewing game footage, teams ensure that every player understands their role and executes each play correctly. Financial statement audits identify internal controls that need to be present or strengthened, ensuring that all financial operations are executed efficiently and effectively, leading to greater accountability and transparency, vital to managing DoD's vast resources. Enhanced decision-making. Insights gained from game film analysis help coaches make strategic decisions about player positions, game plans, and training focuses. Audit results provide critical data that help DoD leaders make informed decisions about budgeting, resource allocation, process improvement, systems development, and strategic planning, ensuring the department uses funds effectively and efficiently to support the mission and improve operational readiness. Long-term benefits. Regular video analysis leads to continuous improvement, allowing teams to refine their strategies and enhance performance, game after game, season after season, as they move closer to achieving their Super Bowl success. Annual financial statements audit leads to strong long-term benefits, including better data reliability, improved financial visibility, and the identification of previously unknown assets. These improvements support ongoing efforts to achieve a clean audit opinion and improve on overall performance. DoD's financial statement audits, like gameful analysis, provides invaluable insights and benefits. They identify weaknesses, enhance coordination, improve decision-making, and can lead to long-term improvements. They are fundamental building blocks of sound policy and effectively managing our nation's defense resources. Your continued interest and oversights are essential as DoD strives to achieve these goals. Thank you once again for the opportunity to testify on this important subject, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Khan, thank you very much, yielding back your time. Mr. Khan, if you could take a look up, we should have our scorecard up there in just a second, and that's the main thesis of what we're attempting to accomplish today. Do you mind taking a minute and just in an overview process, tell us the good and tell us where we ought to aim of what we need to make it better?
Thank you, Congressman Session. Thank you for that question. The scorecard is a snapshot of the DoD's status. That's what the bottom line is. It tracks 5 key performance measures, which are necessary for any federal agencies to get to auditability. In this case, this has been applied. How the scores had been developed, this is specific to the DoD's circumstances. The key categories are financial statement reliability, the progress that DoD is making in addressing the issues that have been identified during the financial statement audit. Then it also highlights the planning, the oversight, and then finally it focuses on the systems. The systems are critical to driving financial statement auditability at the Department of Defense, specifically for the military departments, the large components. Their audit is only possible if DoD has sound financial management systems with operating effectiveness. Operating effectively, the key measure for that effectiveness is what we have towards the bottom, systems compliant with FFMIA. That is critical for DoD to comply. Without that, it'll be very difficult. DoD, the military departments would be challenged to attain auditability. It may be possible for smaller entities to be able to do that through manual workarounds, but the size of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force is immense. So it's critical for systems to be sound and compliant with FFMIA. Thank you.
Earlier in the hearing, we had noted that the United States Marine Corps discovered that they could get things done by working hard. As many times it takes a team effort, and I think that that's what the Marine Corps has done. I note that they came across with an overall grade that was not just passing, but really for the first time ever in DoD, they passed the audit. When we look at this, I notice there are Fs on system compliance with financial management requirements, FF. Take a minute and tell me how we make that better.
This grade is in part self-reported by the military services, and in part it's also because of a lack of reporting by the IPAs. Federal Financial Management Information Act requires compliance with 3 specific categories. It is compliance with federal financial management systems requirements. It's compliance with federal financial accounting standards, and it's also compliance with the U.S. Standard General Ledger.
Is it fair that we have that as a question? Because I think it's completely within any audit management system that would be required. Are we asking the right thing of them?
Yes, sir. It's
Okay.
essential because of the size and complexity of the military departments that this compliance be attained.
Mr. Steffens, welcome. You're an Eagle Scout. You like to leave your campsite better than the way you found it. Are we fair? Are we asking, is this grade fair that has been placed upon this DOD organization?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's fair. I respect the grade. I respect the process that was going through and the intent here to try to get to a baseline here of how the departments are doing. What I'd offer, though, as supplemental to the report card here, the scorecard that was given, is there are other ways that we are looking foundationally to try to assist the military departments to getting there as well. So we have a number of metrics that we look at. We have our own individual roadmaps, as Mr. Khan and Mr. Mansfield are aware, to get to some foundational things. One of the things we've learned, sir, particularly I've learned over the past 2 years, is you saw some F grades there, obviously, but there are a lot of dependencies that those military departments have on either the DoD enterprise, some of the service providers, some things perhaps they need at the enterprise level from the chief information officer to get their F grade to a higher level. So I understand the need to try to give that baseline grade, but I also want to stress the interdependency that's required here amongst the services and the DoD enterprise to improve that grade. And that's what we're trying to do, a lot of focus here at the DoD level into providing assistance to those military departments so they have the tools to improve.
I think Mr. Mansfield very clearly made us all aware again, downrange, you're doing your job, it's hard to get the widgets done also. And I think that was what you tried to get me to understand yesterday. It's not a lack of effort, it's just as hard getting it done. Thank you very much. I'd now like to go to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick things. Mr. Steffens, I understand you're leaving service after 39 years?
Mr. Ranking Member, that's correct. I'm retiring here next month after 39 years.
Well, congratulations and God bless. That's a long haul. And oftentimes, people in the government don't always say to those who are leaving, job well done. But from everything I've seen, you've had a job very well done. And we wish you well. I know I speak on behalf of the chairman when I say that. Mr. Khan, when we met for the briefing session, I guess it was last week, the chairman and myself, it was very interesting and informative, particularly the notion about the scorecard. And I said to you then that my real concern, in addition to making sure we do what we ought to do when we ought to do it in terms of an audit, is the other side of that. And what happens when we don't capture the dollars we should capture, when money is going through a sieve, when people are complaining. And the other side of that is the human side. I think I may have said then that whether we're talking about undergirding the Social Security system or Medicare for our seniors or women, infant, and children programs that are in desperate need of funding or dollars that get lost that can't go to small business loans or development, none of those dollars can we recapture and replace. They're out of the window, which is why so many people have a dire and terrible assessment of the Department of Defense's ability and capability to manage its finances. So that human side always gnaws at me. I mean, every audit, every budget, every year. And I think more than anything else, when I notice the scoring of the Marine Corps in various categories, and I think the only one that it did not do as good in was material weakness downgrades. What's so magic about the role of the Marine Corps in this audit that you can share with us that ought to be a guidepost to the other areas and other agencies within the Department of Defense that could give some hope?
Right. Thank you, Congressman Mfume. The Marine Corps, like Mr. Mansfield was saying, went through this unusual time frame, 2 years. So, I mean, that's something which has to be considered. The lessons learned are the tone at the top. The Marine Commandant made this a directive that every person within the Marine Corps is going to be all hands on deck to support this audit effort. and they fell in line, and everyone helped to pull the information together to support the audit. That was critical. In addition to that, there was a directive from the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary of Defense to the other business provider, and that's what the interdependency that Mr. Stefan was talking about. That really promoted a lot of interagency cooperation, but it does happen, but they made it a priority to help the Marine Corps audit effort. And the other one is that they implemented a new system before the audit period started. So when they entered the audit period, the new system was operating somewhat effectively, but still it was in place. That made the path towards auditability that much clearer and easier to obtain.
Do you see that same kind of leadership, accountability, and directive taking place in the Army and the Navy?
That will be essential. Whether it happens or not, I cannot say that. It's yet to be seen. But that sort of leadership, tone at the top, at that level, is essential. In financial management high risk, we consider leadership to have been met. There's tone at the top. But it has to happen at different levels. And we have to see that at the Army, the Navy, at the Air Force, so they undergo the same level of effort to really be able to move a large amount of data to be able to reach auditability. And the window is closing down pretty quickly before that time runs out to reach auditability by 2028.
And I'm going to ask you to go out on a limb. Why do you think that has not been the case at the Army, the Navy, the Air Force?
In large part because of the size and complexity, the communication lines are somewhat strained. Marine Corps, like Congressman Sessions has mentioned, is only 2% of DoD. Now, we are talking about the other military departments, they're 90%. So they have to have clearer communication, and I think that's where the focus should be. So there's no ambiguity as to what's needed to be able to get to the finish line.
Okay, and I think I heard both of you and Mr. Mansfield in your testimony refer to the fact that some of the financial accounting systems being used date back to the 1980s. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk a little about that. So one of the things that we issued a report back in January on legacy systems within the Department of Defense. And what we determined is that within the DoD, they've identified internally about 232 systems that they consider to be relevant to financial statement reporting. We determined that not only is that list maybe insufficient, so it doesn't contain or capture the full amount of systems that the department actually uses or relies upon, but also the definition that the DoD applied at the time that information was collected in terms of what a legacy system is was a little short-sighted in that it only identified systems that would be retired within the next 3 years. However, when we looked, for example, the DoD had identified specifically, I think, 23 systems that they had reported to Congress that needed to be retired. Of those 23 systems, 14 of them weren't scheduled to retire until 2029 or later. So some are going out to 2031. I'm sorry, 2019 and on, or 20, I apologize. 2019 and on. So some of these systems, like you said, date back to the 1970s. So a specific one I can talk to is the Standard Army Finance Information System. It has a retirement date of 2031. It's non-U.S. General Ledger compliant. It was created in the 1970s. At the time we did our review, there was no modernization plan. And that system isn't necessarily considered to be a legacy system because it's not planned to be retired until 2031. So that really is the kind of, in a nutshell, kind of the issue the DoD faces. There's a lot of systems that they're using and they rely upon for operations, so they can't just turn the systems off. They have to make determinations on how to replace those systems. And what we've recommended is not to just make recommendations on each system individually, but to look across the operational responsibilities across the department and try and make decisions so you're replacing multiple systems with one new system to simplify the department's information systems like programs to make it just easier to oversight, easier to maintain, easier to modernize in the future. So you're only doing a few systems versus a few hundred systems.
So I'm just amazed. My time is up. Maybe we can come back to it. How we all can sit here and see clearly what has to be done, but the persons running the show can't seem to figure it out. It's almost like many of the inefficiencies are built in. I'm not a paranoid person, but I don't believe Humpty Dumpty just fell. I think he was pushed. And I think some of these inefficiencies are in place to keep a good thing going, and in the meantime, it does a disservice to our troops, it does a disservice to our nation, and the other face, which I talked about earlier, the face of all those Americans that are not getting the benefits they should get because so much money is lost in this deep, dark hole that we call DOD. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. I'd like to yield to distinguished gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, 5 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be moving fast, which is rare for me. Mr. Chairman, federal agencies are required to conduct annual audits under the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990. The Department of Defense receives more funding than any other federal agency. More than half of federal discretionary spending goes to DOD. Yet it's the only federal agency not to achieve a clean audit opinion. Mr. Mansfield, I'm going to be directing my question at you, so I'm going to ask you to tune in with me. Let me ask you up front. You're the Deputy Inspector General for Audit under the U.S. Department of Defense Office of the Inspector General. Is that correct? So you're like a financial law enforcement officer. Is that correct?
Wouldn't go quite that far.
You look at it like that? So you're familiar with the term?
We call the balls and strikes.
You're familiar with the term reasonable suspicion?
Yes.
So in looking through money, would you be able to recognize something that looks suspicious?
I would like to think so.
Most probably.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I suggest to you that you're not going to have clean audits out of the DOD until we address the culture within the DOD of confounding and even suspicious decisions out of the Department of Defense regarding programs costing billions and billions and billions of dollars. How can you possibly have a clean audit when you have mysterious things going on? So I'm going to drive into one example. I'm going to give one particularly egregious example. If you'll direct your attention to the screen, if I may have, thank you. Let's just go through the timeline here. This is one large interaction between Austal Shipyards and the DOD, United States Navy, that's been going on for a long time. February 2017, wide media reports highlight concerns about China's frigate design resembling the United States Navy's littoral combat ship, the LCS. That coincides with also USA's joint venture with a Chinese shipbuilder. June 2020, also gets $50 million. The DOD invests $50 million in a grant to Austal to establish steel shipbuilding capabilities, funded by the DPA and the CARES Act. They've never built a steel ship, but they got $50 million American treasure to set up the capability to do so. 2022, September, myself and Congressman Dunn expressed national security concerns officially to DHS and Navy secretaries about Austal USA's OPC contract amidst the LCS program scrutiny. In 2023, a federal grand jury indicts 3 individuals with accounting fraud at Austal USA related to LCS contracts. July 2023, myself and Congressman Dunn sent a letter to the Navy OIG requesting an investigation into Austal USA regarding connections to China and this ongoing mystery of money and contracts being awarded for steel vessels when they had never built a steel vessel. It continues. May 2024, the DODIG meets with me after it had been confirmed to me from the DODIG that the DOJ was now involved investigating Austal and things that I had put on the table. DODIG meets with me and acknowledges ongoing investigations in response to concerns, but they refuse to provide any further details because it's an ongoing DODIG and DOJ investigation. June 2024, the former Secretary of the Navy becomes the chairman of Austal Limited. You can't make this stuff up, America. How are you going to possibly get a clean audit when this is the culture that we're dealing with? August 2024, Austal agrees to settle accounting fraud and false claims with the DOJ by paying by a $25 million fine. The fine was supposed to be $71 million, but they reduced it because also said they didn't have the money. September 2024 also receives another $450 million contract to expand their submarine module production in Mobile, Alabama, basically building them a shipyard with American money. September 2024, just the other day, also gets another $152 million Navy contract to build infrastructure for the Columbia-class and Virginia-class submarine modules. It's almost, that's $600 million that they've been given just this year, this month, after this ongoing. The former Secretary of the Navy is the CEO of the company, an Australian company. Mr. Mansfield, does this rise to the level of reasonable suspicion in the financial realm, sir? Are you familiar with any of these investigations that allegedly are taking place within the IG's office?
Sir, so I focus on audits, not criminal investigations, but I am familiar with the public disclosures discussions regarding the settlements reached by DOJ.
That's encouraging. So you are familiar with what I'm discussing here. The bigger picture here, Mr. Steffens, Mr. Mansfield, Mr. Khan, is that the Department of Defense returns to Congress every year and asks for hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. We're responsible for funding, and I'm honored to fund the Department of Defense. But we can't continue to operate without some degree of accountability for this money. It's almost $1 trillion a year now. When you have things like this going on, it just blows the minds of Americans that witness it. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but my passion for this topic has not. I thank you for having this hearing today, and I yield.
Thank the gentleman. Now move to the gentlewoman, Ms. Norton. Recognize 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For over 3 decades, the Government Accountability Office has maintained a high-risk list, as it's called, to identify serious weaknesses in critical government programs and services. The Government Accountability Office added Defense Department financial management to that list in 1995, and it has remained there ever since. Mr. Khan, briefly, why is the Defense Department financial management on the high-risk list?
DOD has got problem with its internal controls. They are unable to track the money that they've been given, primarily because of weak systems which were implemented decades ago. And those problems continue to persist. We have made recommendations. DOD could help themselves by implementing the recommendations we have made in the area of financial management as well as business system modernization.
Well, Mr. Khan, the Defense Department has 2 other items of critical concern to the high-risk list: the business systems modernization and weapons systems acquisition. Beyond financial management, the Defense Department has long-standing problems with effectively procuring and overseeing the products and services it spent more than $456 billion on in fiscal year 2023. So, Mr. Khan and Mr. Mansfield, can you quantify the impact of the Defense Department's ineffective procurement processes?
I don't know that I can quantify it, but what I would say in terms of moving forward, there's like 3 elements to really solid acquisition, right? The first is clear requirements. Oftentimes, the DOD's requirements at first take are not as clear as they could be, and it ends up with modifications to acquisition programs, right? Because they adjust the requirements often after they're set up. The second thing is a clear and measurable oversight plan by the federal government. So the contracting officers have to have a clear way of doing quality assurance and quality assessments, surveillance plans, and making sure that they're getting what they pay for. So those two elements are critical. The third element that's even more critical is the wherewithal within the department to actually hold contractors accountable for failure to meet those contract requirements. I think if you look through our history of oversight and acquisition programs, those are the three areas that stick out the most for us. Unclear requirements that are modified, the department not having quality oversight of the department, and then even when it does its oversight, it doesn't consistently hold contractors accountable for not meeting expectations set out in the contracts.
Mr. Khan?
The commonality, the common thread between the three high-risk areas you mentioned are it's tracking the money, whether it's acquisition, or it's financial management or business system modernization. Business system modernization is really the infrastructure to be able to enable tracking the money from the budget when it's appropriated to when it's the purchase orders goes out, and then when you receive the goods and services, that has to be tracked. So that's one important control DoD needs to have, that they're receiving goods and services, including large contracts and weapon systems, for what they have paid for. And those goods and services have been accounted for, and especially if it's goods, the location, quantity, count, and condition is known.
Well, Mr. Khan and Mr. Mansfield, how could this subcommittee help the Defense Department improve its procurement of business and weapon systems? Mr. Khan and Mr. Mansfield.
By continuing to hold DoD accountable through various means that you have, hearings such as this is important, and then asking for additional briefings and information when you have any questions. We will be more than happy to meet with you and your staff.
Mr. Mansfield?
Yeah, I think transparency is key to the department being successful in this area. So whether it be through congressional oversight and sharing the information that you glean from the department publicly, or oversight like GAO and the DoD OIG do, we provide our findings publicly as well. And so sharing that information when we find deficiencies and we can make recommendations that are actionable by the department, the fact that those are known by the public, that can create additional pressure on the government to take action in a more responsive, more timely manner. Not to say that the government and the DoD is generally responsive to our recommendations, agreeing with us, or working through alternate approaches, but it's that sunshine that's placed on that through transparency, through reporting and venues like this that actually help, I think, apply that pressure in a more consistent manner.
My time has expired.
Well, I'd like to, Mr. Steffens, if he could, to answer this, because yesterday I asked exactly the same thing, and today is today, it's not yesterday, so we'll see what he says today.
Mr. Chairman, to provide some context to the high risk.
Well, essentially what you said is it was made important to general officers that they were going to follow through on this stuff.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Now,
So-
and that's what you said yesterday.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The two documents were released within the last year from the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. One was for the senior executives to have this codified in their performance standards for audit.
Right.
Very important. The second thing, just released within the last month from the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness, was for the general officer and flag officers to also be held accountable. This is groundbreaking. This guidance went out to the military departments in August. And they have to report back to the Undersecretary on their plan to achieve this. So I believe this is a thing that we're tracking very closely. We find this will be very helpful to us in getting to that tone at the top. I just wanted to highlight for a second, to provide some context, though, for Mr. Khan's comment about the high-risk areas. We have been working very diligently in the financial management arena, and I think Mr. Khan will agree, we've made progress here. Yes, since 1995, we've been on the high-risk list, but since 2017, we've made significant progress in getting, of the 5 criteria, We've gone from not met at all to partially met for most of them, and one for fully met. And we have closed, out of 52 recommendations, we've closed 15 of them in the past year and a half. So we are moving toward that. We take it very seriously. We think that the high-risk program is very complementary to the audit as well. A lot of those things that we get after here in the high-risk program are going to benefit us in terms of getting a clean audit opinion, sir.
I found your question enlightening, and I hope you got a good answer. Yes, ma'am, thank you. I'd like to move now to the gentleman, Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to change my order of questionings that I had planned, because I thought I just heard you all say to get accountability, we should do some more hearings and we should do some more briefings. And that would help us get accountability for 15 years of failed audits, right? I mean, I find that really unsatisfactory. Really unsatisfactory for me, and I'm hoping that maybe you can dispel some of this. So, Mr. Mansfield, you talked about some of the problems in the acquisition program. I thought I heard you say something like vague. The requirements are vague; they're indefinite, and then in oversight, there's problems with oversight, and then there's a problem with accountability. And I can't help think, but what Mr. Mfume said, and he said that this money is going down to a dark hole. And so I guess I'm finding myself absolutely apoplectic here in some ways, because I'm thinking of the F-35 program. When you look at the F-35 program, when you guys are conducting your audit, Mr. Mansfield, do you take into account performance of production by the contractors or the program itself?
Yes.
And so about a year and a half ago, you had the high water mark, you had about 55% of delivered F-35s were operable. I'm going to put that word in there, operable. The word I got today was it's really closer to 29% today. Well, how bad does a program have to be before somebody is held accountable, Mr. Mansfield? I mean, I'm just dying to know that question. How bad does a program have to be? Because two aspects of this. This is a program that's supposed to go through 2088 or something like that, and it's going to cost us about $2 trillion. And the CBO said 2 years ago that over the next 10 years, DOD is going to receive $7.1 trillion from the federal government, and I think that's low based on just the trends that we're taking. So I'm curious, what happens, how do we get accountability besides a hearing and briefings? And I know that there's been hearings in HASC about this very program. I know we've had them. We've had briefings. I've sat in SCIFs. But we're still looking at a totally failed program. So what really does get us accountability?
So like I said, one of the roles of us for the DoD OIG is oversight, right? So we don't take specific action on a program. We make recommendations to the department who ultimately has to take action on those programs. Oftentimes our recommendations relate to holding individuals accountable, to stopping programs, depending on the scope of the work that we've conducted. So I think it really falls to the department to take action on the recommendations when we identify those issues and call them out for them.
So the main thing that when we have oversight in Congress, we have y'all come in and testify, and you answer our questions. And this is not the most ideal format, although I'll say Mr. Sessions does a pretty good job because he gives us a little bit extra time. But in the end, it's like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and it's not the most ideal way. And so we get these private briefings. And then the public doesn't know, but we're ticked off after the private briefings. But the founders of this country and the Constitution gave this body the best and strongest check against this type of maladministration. And it is the purse strings. Mm-hmm. And so when you see a program where 21% only 21% or 29%, whatever it is today, of F-35s in a multi-trillion-dollar program are even operable, maybe this body at this dais should really be looking into a different kind of accountability. Just saying that, you can see that I'm frustrated here because this is not the first one we've done of this, and I appreciate you all being here to talk about this. But I wanted to just ask one last area here. Do you guys is there a comprehensive audit that is done over the spare parts suppliers to DOD?
So I would say we haven't conducted a comprehensive audit over all of the suppliers, but we have looked at specific spare parts supplies, streams, or certain providers of that. Yes, sir.
And over the course of time, we can go back to the, what, $800 toilets and $600 hammers, but we can get up to, there was one DOD Inspector General found one supplier was charging 3,800% just a couple of years ago above the contracted amount. So my question is, how do we get hold of that end of the misspend?
Yeah, so I think we've made some recommendations related to two sides of that. The first is sometimes the contracting officers, when negotiating prices with a contractor, especially if it's a sole source provider, they don't necessarily have the information they need to make good decisions for the department. And that comes down to cost data, right? They're relying on historical pricing, or in other words, last year I paid $100 for that, so this year they're charging me $101, so that's a fair price. Now, I don't think you and I would do that in our normal, we do a little more research. How much does it actually cost to produce that item? What's going into that? So maybe that item actually costs you $50 to produce. Am I going to pay $101 this year because I paid $100 last year? Hopefully I'm not. The problem is the way that the acquisition regulations are established, it sets contracting officers up to use that historical pricing data versus the no-kidding hard facts of what the costs are. And that's difficult, it puts the contracting officer in a very difficult spot in terms of making an informed decision.
So there maybe needs something statutorily that needs to be changed to modify that language, is that right?
Yeah, and we made a recommendation a couple years ago. The DOD submitted two legislative requests or proposals. I don't think they made it into the NDAA 2 years ago. There was another one for fiscal year 24 that was submitted. That one went through OMB and made it up. I don't believe that is in the current version of the NDAA. But
And it's a crying shame, Mr. Mansfield.
there is some stuff out there, though, to look at, sir.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I have some documents I'd like to include in the record. A piece called "What a Waste, $778 billion for the Pentagon and Still Counting." Another one entitled "Waste of the Day Pentagon, $50 billion behind in building repairs." Another one, committee requests information on Pentagon's $125 billion in waste. Another one, Pentagon buried study that found $125 billion in wasteful spending. And then this one, which I didn't get a chance to ask about because I'd like to know what's really going on with this one as well. Forbidden Russian oil flows into Pentagon supply chain. Now yield. Thank you.
Without objection, we'll include those in the record, and I would encourage the gentleman, if he would choose to have additional questions for our witnesses, we'll find out at the end. We're asking them to please answer those for us. And thank you very much, the gentleman from Arizona. Ms. Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I do thank you all for joining us today again as we continue along on this series of exploring why Congress continues to funnel hundreds of billions of dollars to an organization that can't even keep track of how they spend the money. I'm sorry, or I apologize if I don't take, or I can't take as patient a tone as some of my other colleagues, because I think about how even just a small percentage of that money that cannot be accounted for could fund things like universal school meals or needed infrastructure projects in my district or child care, but instead we don't even know where it is. So, Mr. Khan, if Congress gave DOD unlimited resources to upgrade systems and hire people, how long would it take for the DOD to pass a clean audit?
It's, it's a very good question, Congresswoman Lee. I mean, just laying out the timelines, what DOD is looking towards is 2028. They have the resources. They're working towards that timeline. But you know, whether they meet that date or not, it's difficult to predict because they have huge challenges before them as depicted on the scorecard. So it's difficult to answer that question, Congress.
Thank you. So it's more than just getting the right computer systems and staff in place.
Correct. Yes.
Mr. Mansfield, would you agree that unless DOD's leadership makes this a priority, we're not going to get a successful audit?
I would agree with that, yes.
Thank you. Auditing DOD is expensive for taxpayers and is lucrative for the corporations that profit from the military-industrial complex. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a June 2024 report from the DOD OIG showing how between fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2022, DOD spent more than $4 billion in government and contract costs related to finding solutions to help it achieve a clean audit.
Without objection, we'll enter that in the record.
Thank you. So much money for zero results. I think just about anyone else would get fired for that type of failure, yet the DOD faces no consequences. Mr. Mansfield, can you explain some of the management issues that the OIG discovered in reviewing this $4 billion failure to improve its auditability?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that report up. That is, we looked at the department's efforts to contract for remediation efforts and support for the financial statement audits. And so some of the things we found in terms of that was the DOD doesn't have clear definitions of what should be contracted for remediation efforts. And so when trying to compile the amount of effort or to take the amount of effort and put a dollar figure to it that's spent on remediation efforts, it was a little difficult to do because different parts of the department are using different definitions for what is considered remediation. We also went in and looked at some of the contract requirements, and we found that they weren't as clear as they could be. There weren't specific deliverables within some of those remediation contracts, which makes it very difficult for the department to know it got exactly what it paid for. We also found that a number of the efforts underneath those contracts, while they were value-added efforts, were not clearly linked to the department's remediation goals. And so if the department is saying these are our priorities for remediation, but then they're putting money into things that aren't directly aligned to that, it doesn't feel like they're really kind of having a consolidated, focused approach at the remediation.
Thank you, and I thank you for your very thoughtful answer. But the fact remains that the DOD can waste $4 billion on a failure and barely bat an eye. It just shows how much of an overinflated tick the agency is. It's sucking the resources and money from our federal government. No government agency should be held above accountability. And now we must ask ourselves, at what point do we stop using the carrot approach and start using the stick? The solution is clearly not giving DOD more resources and money for passing their audit. That's failed over and over again. They've shown that even with their seemingly unlimited resources, they don't care to work to improve. Maybe what we need are real consequences. Their budget is already overinflated and should be cut regardless of their ability to give a clean audit. So how about slashing their budget every year they fail to deliver a clean audit? Regardless, this isn't a new problem. This has been going on for decades, and their financial mismanagement is the reason they've been on GAO's high-risk list since 1995, meaning it is among the federal government programs and operations most likely to commit waste, fraud, abuse, or mismanagement. The Pentagon must rethink this culture that enables unchecked and unfettered spending at every level and prioritize its financial duty. Failing to do so harms our national security. I do thank you for your time, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman, Gentlewoman yields back her time. Now yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Alabama.
I want to raise some questions, Mr. Chairman, about what the GAO has tried to do in terms of getting more accuracy from the Department of Defense. And despite the massive spending, the only federal agency in the country that has failed to pass an independent audit. They remain on the GAO's high-risk list for waste, fraud, and abuse for 34 years. Last year, the Department of Defense failed its sixth consecutive audit and was unable to fully account for 63% of the $3.8 billion of its assets. A Navy audit found $4.4 billion in previously untracked inventory. Air Force identified $5.2 billion worth of variances in this general ledger. Reports have found defense contractors routinely overcharge the Pentagon and I would add the American taxpayer by nearly 40 or 50%. There's a significant amount of money, Mr. Steffens, being spent every year. Approximately $1 billion being spent on projects around getting the DOD to a clean audit. It's about 15% of the amount is spent on audit services, but the rest is spent on building new systems and all kinds of contracts under the umbrella of audit readiness. That's a lot of money. How much insight and influence do you have into ensuring that the money is being well spent?
Appreciate the question on that. I believe, sir, that we are getting, definitely instilling more accountability from the Secretary and Deputy Secretary on
But
this.
how do you account for the fact that you can't pass an audit? I mean, are the systems being modernized? Are new systems being built? I mean, what improvements are you making?
So we have to approach it from about four or five different fronts. Mr. Khan came to the House Armed Services Committee, I think about 13 years ago, with 6 imperatives. I think that need to be, and all of them are important, not just systems, but
But you never implement them.
well, we're working on each one of them. We hold this truth, you know, trained and ready workforce, a good defined business architecture, business process architecture needs to be in place as well.
I understand that you need to maintain a certain level of secrecy in some of the things that you do, that money is fungible, but the fact that you haven't had a successful audit in 34 years and the fact that you haven't implemented much of what the GAO has recommended is problematic. I mean, it's important that the American public have confidence in the Department of Defense. I want to bring up something else because we keep hearing about massive overruns in defense systems or weapons platforms as an issue of change orders. Does the Department of Defense authorize the construction and manufacture of systems before the design is final? Does that ever happen?
It wouldn't surprise me that it has happened before.
Why would that happen? I worked for 2 international engineering companies, and we typically didn't start building something until we had a final design.
What I could offer, sir, is there's a delay, there's a push.
No, that's not, a delay is something different. Not having a final design, but starting the development of a weapon system or constructing a facility is different. If you start before the design is final, you're almost guaranteeing that you're going to have massive numbers of change orders. Would that have anything to do with the way Congress appropriates funds for the Department of Defense? Are you starting projects before they're ready because you're afraid Congress won't put the money there in the next appropriation? Would that be a problem?
Oh, it would obviously be a problem, yes.
Is that why you do it?
I don't,
Is that why you had such massive overruns on the F-35? You're afraid that the Congress would pull the program? I mean, there was a project that I worked on in engineering where we were supposed to be retrofitting rockets, and I think we'd already spent nearly $1 billion, and they pulled the project. Is that part of what's happening here?
I can't speak to the F-35 or the project management piece, but, you know,
Mr. Mansfield, can you speak to that?
So I can say some of the oversight work that we've done, some of the things that we've identified is similar to your point, it really gets to the test and evaluation process where throughout the test and evaluation process for an acquisition program, so looking at a system, the DoD will do some testing or.
But that's different from starting before the design is right.
No, but so they'll identify that there's deficiencies and they'll still move forward with the manufacturing process before addressing all those deficiencies, knowing they're going to have to retrofit down the road.
Yeah,
at
I
an
understand
additional
that
cost.
because that's an evolving system. But when you're building a facility or some other things where you develop a design and then you build to the design, from my observation, you're starting work on projects and facilities before the design is ripe. And I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, if it's because they're concerned the money won't be there, so they go ahead and start, and we wind up spending 30, 40, 50% more on these weapon systems and these facilities than we should, because and then you're not doing adequate audits adequate oversight of these projects. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think we're done with this. I'd like for us to continue to try to exercise oversight and do some additional follow-up. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me agree with the gentleman and also agree with the panelists who don't think our work is done because they don't think we've always made sure at the highest levels of DOD of how important this is. And they want a clean audit, and they want these things. So I think your points are well made.
I'm not sure they're taking us seriously.
Well, you know, I certainly think that what this subcommittee should do is walk a mile in their sandals, so to speak. And there are a number of things about F-35, B-22, a lot of these things that became abject failures because someone thought they were going to use it one way and was used another. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are suppliers to F-35. And they may be in other countries and trying to get those piece parts together and trying to get that. So I do agree with you, because we ought to talk about the billions, not the thousands. And I think that's the point that the distinguished gentleman has made, that I do take at hand, and we do need to be concerned about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to move to the gentlewoman, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Steffens, you know, so just bear with me here. So they say that, you know, the Department of Defense failed its 6th audit. How many audits have they had?
So, ma'am, since 2018, fiscal year 2018, we've gone under full financial statement audit. So that has been 6 consecutive years. The first time we ever went under a full financial statement audit was 2018. So
We never did a full audit before that?
Before that, no, ma'am.
Okay. And so what is the percentage, because I read that they could not account for half of its assets. You probably heard a lot of my colleagues talk about it. It's what, 3.1 trillion. How much of that is the entire federal budget, percentage-wise?
Both asset-wise, I don't have the exact percentages, but in terms of the budget, you know, we are roughly half the discretionary spending for the United States.
So it's actually 78% of the entire federal budget. That's just the excess of $3.1 trillion.
In assets, yeah.
78% of the entire federal budget. You know, I know my colleagues talk to you all about this, but I start the Get the Lead Out caucus, and we've been trying to, and we got tremendous bipartisan support, of course. I think all of us agree no amount of lead in water is safe anymore, and it never really was. And we need about approximately just a minute, I mean, 60 billion just to start putting a debt into removing lead pipes. And just thinking about the fact that I'm always being told, well, how are we going to pay for it? And you see this kind of waste, and I really commend my colleagues to bring this forward, because I kid you not, I could be in a room in a town hall in one of parts, and I don't just represent the city of Detroit, I represent some of the suburban communities. This is one of the consistent things they'll agree with me on, even if politically we don't agree on a lot of other issues. So Mr. Khan, one of the things that I was reading on in regards to the clean audit specifically, I didn't understand what this meant. It said, since 1995, the GAO has designated DOD financially management as a high-risk area due to long-standing issues, including ineffective processes systems. What does that really mean? What does it mean to say that they are designated as a high-risk area?
So it would be similar to any federal programs. It needs to have systems and processes, especially when a large amount of assets and money is involved in there. DoD was set up to support the warfighting missions. They didn't have systems and control to do financial management. They were to process logistics. Because of that, they were not able to account for the money that was given to them in the annual appropriations. They were not properly.
So it's about waste. High risk is like, oh, are they wasting money, right?
It leads to waste. It does, yes. It's about transparency and accountability. If you don't have that, then it could lead to waste, fraud, and abuse. Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Mansfield, and I'm like genuinely, is it only war manufacturing in the Pentagon budget? What else is in there?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
In the Pentagon budget, is it just war manufacturing? Like if I was to go to my community, and I know kind of the answer, and I would explain this to them, what else is in there? Give me something that would blow my mind.
So it's like any organization, although I'd say the DoD is like a strange microcosm of society, right? So there's grocery stores, there's healthcare, there's school systems, there's manufacturing, there's people, right? You got to pay for all the individuals in addition to the acquisition program. So it's a lot. There's a lot of things.
So it's not just war manufacturing like everybody thinks.
By no means.
Yeah. No, I know that, Chairman. I wish people would understand that, though. When you were looking at it, Mr. Mansfield, and I believe you're the Inspector General, correct?
I'm the Deputy Inspector General for Audit.
Deputy, yeah. Sorry.
Rob Storch is our Inspector General.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I apologize.
That's okay.
Even with the work that you're doing, what stood out to you the most? In kind of thinking about, in line what Mr. Khan talked about of high risk.
Yeah, so I believe Mr. Khan hit it right at the nail right on the head. It's about systems. So, if you look at, when we do the financial statement audit, we issue what are called, the auditors issue what are called notices of findings and recommendations. Those are, as you look at each individual kind of system or process, you make recommendations on how to improve those. In 2020.
So you guys have been doing that for years now?
Yeah.
Any of them get implemented?
Yeah, so in 2023, the DoD closed just over 1,000, almost 1,500 of the NFRs that we had, that's our kind of lingo, those are finding recommendations that we had issued in previous years. So they do make progress every year, but as in any improvement process, as you fix one thing, that leads to us to be able to look at a little deeper, dig a little more, and we do identify additional issues.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, though, is about 50%, maybe a little more than 50% of the notices of findings and recommendations that we issue are related to information technology, whether that's system security or controls over system upgrades, system interfaces, those types of things. So,
How much of the budget, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but how much of the budget are contractors?
I don't have an answer for that with me today. I apologize.
Do you know what I mean by
can take it
that?
for the
Like,
record.
are they like separately done? Like not outside of the federal, like they're contracted out?
I don't know how to, Tom, if you have an answer for that, I'm not sure.
I actually don't know the answer to this. This is,
I don't either. I can take it for the record, though, and try and get something for you.
Well, the budget is broken down by program, but each
Yeah.
part of that program, there's a contractor part of it as well, and as Mr. Mansfield mentioned, part of it is to pay people. A large part of it's to pay people, both civilians and military. Some of it is used for, things like travel and other areas, but, contracting is a large piece, but a lot of that
I
contracting
think
is,
over 50% of the Pentagon budget is contractors?
I believe it's less than that.
It's less, okay, well, that's okay. Yeah, no, I know you hear this a lot, but 78% is a lot. I mean, of the whole federal budget, you think about everything, healthcare, Social Security, everything, and 78% of it. And just to think that I'm begging just for $60 billion to actually try to get clean water across our country. But with that, I really commend you, Chairman, for doing this. This is incredibly important. I hear this question all the time. Why can't they pass an audit? What's going on? And Americans of all different political backgrounds really don't like wasteful spending, especially when they're still struggling and they can't figure out why they're still struggling while, again, watching kind of wasteful spending, or as Mr. Khan calls it, a high-risk area within it. So thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back her time. I'd like to now move to distinguished gentleman who has taken his time to be here. Gentleman is recognized, Mr. Burleson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you're right.
I think that I try to treat this role as to try to be the best steward of the taxpayer dollars that I could possibly be. when I think about the families in my district and how hard they work, and then their taxpayer dollars are sent here, and the American people in my district, they're frustrated. It's the question is who's to be accountable for this, right? The concern that I have is that, but by having all this uncertainty, when we cannot pass an audit, then all of the conspiracy theories, when people talk about military-industrial complex, all of these things it becomes more prevalent because there is no certainty. There's nothing that you can point to. So my question is, we haven't passed a clean audit ever. The Department of Defense is the only agency that has not done so. Congress has mandated that DOD achieve a clean audit by December 28th of 2028. So my question to each one of you on the panel is, do you think that will happen?
It's a great question. I know there's a lot of concern expressed about that date, and can we meet that date? It will definitely be a challenge. But I believe if we have a couple of key elements in place, I think we can do it. Leadership commitment is first and foremost. More important even than the resources is the sense of priority that our leadership has to have on this. I do feel comforted over the last 2 years, the last 3 years really. Secretary Austin and Secretary take this very seriously. They have issued, and I know I think I've shared some correspondence with both the chairman and the ranking members team on some of the things that they have done in getting not just the financial management folks like myself that are here today, but it's going to require effort from all of the functional areas, the acquisition functional area, the chief information officer, folks from human resources. It is an all hands on deck. Just like we gave the example of the Marine Corps and the great success they had this year, very hard work. But the Commandant and the ACMAC from the Marine Corps, the Assistant Commandant, required everybody to be a part of everybody's business. It was that profound, and he was very, very adamant about that. We will require that same tone at the top at the department level. So the resources. The other thing I'm excited about too recently is technology. We've utilized, we haven't talked much about it today, but Advana is an example, is a platform, a data platform that helps us better remediate, identify where our problem areas are, the areas that need reconciliation, and to remediate those things. And so we're utilizing some of that. With that advanced technology to do better data analytics is we need personnel to also be trained to do that data analytics. And we're working on that very, very much. Workforce, in addition to the systems, in addition to the tone at the top, is we have to have quality professional people to do this. And we're working toward that, making sure we're developing professional competencies within our financial management workforce, but also logistics and acquisition as well. So they are all trained on the importance of audit.
Mr. Mansfield, do you believe that there will be a clean audit by 2028?
So, our role as the Inspector General is to perform the audit, and so I'm very hesitant to make any predictions before we've actually done the work. So I'm going to kind of refrain from saying whether they will pass or not. What I would echo is what Mr. Steffens said. There's a lot of work to do before they get there. And I would also add the department, as much as it's making progress and has, I think, a solid tone at the top at this point, does have a history of sliding expectations and goals to the right. And so it'll be a difficult and uphill battle for the department, although I think they're committed to it, but it still waits to be seen, and we'll have to do the actual audit work before I can give you an opinion on whether they'll pass or not.
Okay, Mr. Khan.
I think there will be early indicators whether or not they can meet that timeline. The system is going to drive that, having compliance system across the department. They have to be in place, in our view, by the end of fiscal year 2026, so that they can begin to process transactions in 27 and 28 to be able to reach an opinion by that date. So we will know, we perform oversight of the DoD, so as we do our work, we'll have good indication as to how the progress is going and what the path to auditability looks like, and if those timelines can be met.
Okay, so Mr. Stevens, is it Steffens or Steve? Sorry. You said that it's going to take a commitment from leadership. and then you said the current, the current leadership is committed. If they're committed, why are we not there yet?
No, I think we're making progress, and obviously we've been under audit now for full financial statement audit for 6 years, over 6 years into our
'Cause
7th
I think
year.
like the American people who are listening, they would wonder, it's been 6 years. That shows there hasn't been any commitment.
I do believe we're at an inflection point, though. I believe we're, over this last 2 years, we've been at an inflection point. The one thing, too, that was pointed out, which I think has actually energized the leadership, is the NDAA 2024 that came out with the mandate for 2028. Initially, we saw that. A lot of people looked at it as a threat. This is challenging. But I have to report to you that this has created an enormous amount of energy in the department. Every functional meeting that we have that addresses audit and financial audit remediation starts out with, team, we have a mandate from Congress for 2028. So that has been very helpful, actually.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more quick? Is this an organizational behavior issue? That's what I'm reading into this, is that you've got a cultural resistance to a lot of this.
But I believe that's changing. I believe that's changing. I think there's a natural, the old Army's motto was to fight and win our nation's wars, right? But it's also, I think, I'll take the Army as an example because I spent a lot of time in the Army. They've developed a process but we have to be accountable as well, and we have to have sound business operations. That will only help our readiness. And I think we have to instill that in our leadership, our senior leadership, operational leadership, that, hey, doing this, getting better business operations, getting more sound, getting audible will actually help readiness in the long term. That's got to be the message, and that's what I think is being received now better than it has before.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does the gentlewoman seek time?
Yes.
Gentlewoman, Ms. Crocker is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be honest and tell you that most of my constituents aren't particularly interested in the finer points of federal financial auditing. But what they do care about is whether their taxpayer dollars are being wasted, whether our military is ready to take on the next threat, and whether our military can continue to keep us and our allies safe. Unfortunately, we're seeing right now what happens when DOD fails to maintain good accounting of its federal funds and government-funded property. A few weeks ago, the DOD Office of Inspector General issued a report claiming that, quote, DOD did not effectively or efficiently implement accountability controls for items delivered to Taiwan from November 2023 through March of 2024. It continued noting that, quote, 2.7 million rounds of ammunition from the DOD, including some that was expired in a mix of original, loose, and incorrect packaging. This is to say nothing more of the 340 of 504, or 67% of the total pallets sent over were water damaged, resulting in other things, including moldy body armor. And I'm gonna just pause here really quickly because we just had a larger hearing earlier today that was talking about the threats of the PRC and the idea that we continue to say that we support Taiwan and we stand with them. And then because of our own failures, we are unable to support those that we are trying to help at the same time that we are casting dispersions on this real threat that China presents is problematic, not to mention these are items that essentially could have been necessary for our own protection. These are items that came out of our own stores. And so it doesn't instill the most confidence, but also just the amount of money that was lost. My district, 20% live at or below poverty. So when they are paying taxes that a lot of them really can't afford in the first place because they need every single dime, it is hard to hear numbers like this and know that literally the amount of money that we send over to DOD are amounts of money that most of us will never see in our bank accounts in a lifetime. It's a problem. But we also know that there are real threats, as we know that the temperature around the world is a little high right now. And as we are attempting to be good allies, we need to do just that and be good allies. And this is one of the easiest ways that we can start, is by making sure that we are holding ourselves accountable for the money that we're spending. DOD's failure to account for and properly oversee its weapons and property funded by taxpayers in my district and across the country is an understatement. National and international security today increasingly relies on good technology, solid record keeping, and cutting-edge data analytics. And every dollar lost to fraud, waste, or abuse means the American people get a less efficient and effective military. Mr. Khan, yes or no? From your experience, can better financial management at DOD improve agency decision-making to better protect our national security and the security of our allies?
Yes.
Now, going back to the DOD report, the Inspector General stated that because of DOD's failures, our government ended up spending an additional, quote, $618,000 in labor and materials to clean and dry wet and moldy body armor and $113,000 to replace damaged body armor delivered to Taiwan. This is to say nothing of the additional cost incurred to replace the unusable munitions sent over, which again was sent over in incorrect packaging. How is DOD supposed to pass an audit if it's supposedly sending arms and weapons to our friends and allies with the wrong label? 1/6 of our total federal budget goes to DOD. And to be clear, I am not underestimating the vital work of the department's mission in protecting our national security and the security of our allies, but it's because of the vital role DOD plays in our lives that Americans demand accountability. The people need to know that if a crisis happens, DOD can protect us and our allies in worst-case scenarios. And to do this, DOD must have a successful audit. Mr. Khan, how long has the Department of Defense's financial management been on GAO's high-risk list?
It's been around 30 years.
And why is DOD's financial management of GAO's high-risk list? Why is it on the list? Sorry.
Because of pervasive internal control weaknesses that prevent accountability of their assets and the budget they've been provided by the Congress.
Thank you. Has DOD's leadership improved the department's financial management in ways that could get it off of the GAO high-risk list?
Yes, I mean, the high-risk list has got 5 criteria. One of the ones, probably the most important, is leadership. That's where they have met the criteria. Tone at the top is very important for remediating the other 4 areas.
Thank you. Although DOD as a whole has yet to achieve a clean audit, 10 of its 29 components passed their audits with clean opinions in FY 2023. While this is nowhere near where DOD needs to be, the progress is promising. DOD must use the success in these components for the remaining areas needing improvement. Can I ask one last question, Mr. Chair? Okay. In fact, Mr. Steffens, just so we have it on record, what are some of the lessons or best practices from the 10 successful components at DOD that can be shared agency-wide?
Sure, thank you for the question. I believe there's a number of lessons learned that we have. Most recently, obviously, from the Marine Corps. We just talked about this, tone at the top. The example that General Smith at the time was the Assistant Commandant set in holding his leaders accountable is vitally important, and we talked about through several of you today. Secondly, the important thing in the Marine Corps, too, is breaking down the stovepipes amongst systems, the acquisition systems and our financial systems, making sure there is free flow of data, the correct data, and the data in the right configurations so a transaction can flow through the purchasing system, through the financial system is very important. We learned from that. But aside from the Marine Corps, and also I think with the Marine Corps, too, is having a very modern, capable enterprise resource planning system, or ERP, in the form of the Defense Agencies Initiative System, which they adopted here several years ago, just recently, and it shows that the systems matter, right? So aside from the Marine Corps, I'll go to the Army Corps of Engineers, only because I served as their CFO there for 6 years, and we've had clean audit opinions, to your point. Standardization is so important. Standardization among entities. Let's establish the policy and have all those organizations do it correctly. Now, I will tell you, in the Corps, maybe it was a little bit easier with 44 districts that could operate the same way. It's a little more challenging in the military departments because you have such a differentiation in missions amongst those various commands. But nonetheless, the standardization has to be important, has to be enforced. So those are a couple examples of things that we have learned from Marine Corps, Army Corps of Engineers, and then working closely with your service provider. I think we've learned here recently from organizations that the working capital funds from Defense Information Systems Agency, the partnership you have with the service provider, being vocal, good exchange on what they can provide for you, and DFAS has done that, is also a good example, ma'am.
Thank you so much. With that, I'll yield.
Gentleman yields back her time. Mr. Mfume asked me to please provide on his behalf unanimous consent to enter to the record the statement from Greg Williams, Director of the Center for Defense Information at the Project on Government Oversight, that offers specific recommendations to increase the accountability and transparency in DOD's acquisition and procurement programs. Without objection, we'll enter that into the record. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I had an opportunity over the last few days as we were preparing this, Mr. Mfume did also, to draw some conclusions that some of our members may have gotten at, some of our members may not have gotten at. We have new members. I confess I've been around for a while. I've not gotten to where I'm going to make any excuses for anybody, but we have to be able to understand where we are, just as you have understood where you are in that process. One of the things I would say is that one of the most interesting parts is that at least the Marine Corps and maybe some of the others hold their general officers accountable for this. Number two, the Marine Corps did make progress. There is a specific example of someone who did pass an audit, as opposed to the years where no one did. I think that organizations can see across themselves specific examples, and I think we ought to give the Marine Corps a pat on the back. When I was at AT&T for a number of years, we tried to celebrate victories, good behavior, encourage things that would be organizationally be beneficial to employees as well as the bottom line of running the business. I think the Marine Corps should get a pat on the back, be told that they did the right thing. Mr. Mfume and I decided today that we're going to go and try and do that. We're going to try and say thank you. I think success needs to be encouraged. Other things which I learned, which I had known for quite some time, we're also not actively in a full-time war posture. Things become, there's less movement of issues and ideas, and organizations can focus perhaps better on what their mission is, but less movement of equipment, less movement necessarily required, even though we are supporting, as has been noted here, a number of our allies. And not all those things, excuse me, have been done correctly. But I believe that I could successfully say that each of you, while you answer the question that all of us had, I did, over the last couple of days, we're gonna make it. And the answer is we can. There's a model for it, but we're going to have to keep working together. So this subcommittee has a lot of work. This subcommittee has more work than just DOD. It has the rest of the government to be concerned with. And last week we held a number of hearings that were stunning in the testimony about the inefficiency of agencies. Part of it, we want to say, we can fix, must fix in the next few days, but they also, when those participants came forth, they said, we've got to fix it. We cannot continue to bleed not just the taxpayer, but the intended purpose of why the money was given in a program. So our process is laid out for Mr. Mfume and I will tell you, I'm delighted with the subcommittee members like Ms. Tlaib and others who've showed up, Mr. Palmer, Mr. Higgins, who I think are really dedicated to work with you. Each of you have distinguished yourself. We appreciate what you do and your teams. Mr. Steffens brought a young man with him yesterday from Georgia, strong colonel who supported him yesterday and others. So it's not just each of you. I know that you have a team. I know that you've got hundreds of people that go and do this work every day. I hope you will pat them on the back and tell them somebody does care. So this now gets to the end of our hearing. Sorry, I've got to read a little closing script here. I now recognize that we are at the end of this, and so without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for each of you as witnesses, and we'll be forwarding these to you. Would expect an answer back. And with that said, this closes the hearing, and I want to thank each of you for being here.